I'd been at Emberlight Foundation for 9 years 10, if you count the months they didn't pay me while I waited for a grant cycle to renew. I never minded the behind-the-scenes work, the spreadsheets, the policy, overlays, the quiet weekend marathons, writing district proposals. I liked knowing that what I built worked even if no one clapped when it did. I wasn't there for applause. I was there for outcomes. The quarterly review had just wrapped another one where my name was tucked neatly into a list of key contributors with no eye contact from leadership. I was used to that. What I wasn't used to was the message from Celeste in my inbox 5 minutes later. Can you swing by my office for a quick sync? Her office was overly curated, always scented like jasmine and stress. I stepped in and sat across from her desk, crossing my legs like it mattered. Celeste smiled tight managerial. Marin, she began first, I want to say how much we value everything you've done this quarter. That was the moment I knew. She went on, words polished to a dull sheen. Your budgetary foresight really helped keep the Western Initiative afloat. The board noticed. I noticed. I waited. And with the strategic partnerships role opening up, we've decided to move LILA into that position. She said it like a compliment, like I should feel proud of LILA's rapid rise, 18 months in no-budget experience, and a calendar full of vibe alignment sessions. I nodded once. Understood. Celeste blinked like she'd expected a question or maybe a protest. I gave her neither. What could I say that the systems she praised had been mine, that LILA still couldn't tell the difference between a 990 form and a balance sheet? Instead, I said, thanks for letting me know. She offered some empty invitation to mentor LILA in the coming months. I stood, shook her hand, and left the office without a single piece of paper in my hand, but with one forming in my mind. By the time I reached my desk, the fire inside me had already settled into something steadier. Not anger, calculation. LILA got new business cards by Monday. She passed them around like confetti at a startup launch, the kind with a lowercase logo and italicized title, Director of Strategic Partnerships. I watched her float from desk to desk in chunky heels and curated excitement, a latte in one hand and a digital productivity book in the other. She greeted people like she was hosting a brunch, not leading national funding strategy. That week, she kicked off something called Culture Calibration Circles. The invite said mandatory optional, which meant everyone showed up with coffee and carefully neutral expressions. LILA opened with a slide deck titled The Heart of Impact, Redesigning Relationships in Purpose-Driven Spaces. Somewhere around the 6th slide, she compared donor engagement to vibrational alignment. I tuned out after that. By Wednesday, I noticed the language in the internal memos. Shifting phrases I'd used in proposals were being reworded, filtered through LILA's glossy tone. Decentralized budget engagement was her term for the same outreach system I designed last year to streamline funding requests. Field synergy nodes meant the partner school liaisons I personally trained. She'd taken the framework and papered it in neon jargon. I didn't speak up, not because I was scared, but because I didn't need to. I still had the original drafts, time-stamped, versioned, tracked. I started sorting them project by project, initiative by region, outcome by fiscal year. I didn't do it with bitterness. I did it like I'd always done everything else thoroughly. The whispers in the break room grew louder. A donor backed out of a pilot. An email got sent twice with contradictory numbers. One of our regional consultants asked me quietly if I was still overseeing the grant flow logic. I told him no. Then I watched the discomfort settle into his face like bad weather. At night, I reviewed old correspondence, attached notes, tagged key messages. I created a folder called Continuity Assets, not for revenge, but for reference. Because if the day came when truth needed structure, I didn't want to rely on memory. By Friday, I had everything I needed in one place, documents, frameworks, and one final letter sealed, but not yet delivered. 2 weeks passed. LILA settled into her role with more enthusiasm than understanding stacking initiatives like mismatched furniture. Meetings ballooned into performances, all sparkle and zero structure. I attended exactly as often as protocol required, offering nothing, absorbing everything. The weight of what I knew had grown dense. It was time. I sent a short message to Celeste that morning, would appreciate a quick one-on-one this afternoon. Her assistant replied with a slot at 3:15. That suited me. I walked into her office carrying a manila envelope and a slim navy folder. Celeste stood when I entered, gesturing toward the same chair where she'd offered me platitudes and disappointment 2 weeks ago. I didn't sit. "Thanks for making time," I said. She smiled politely. "Of course. I wanted to let you know I'll be stepping down." I placed the envelope on her desk. "That's my formal resignation." Her brow lifted just slightly. "I see. And attached is a summary of concerns I believe the board should be aware of." I continued, nodding toward the folder beneath. "Misuse of designated funds, inconsistencies in reporting metrics, and at least one instance of donor redirection without consent." Celeste didn't speak. She picked up the envelope, opened it slowly, and scanned the top page. Her fingers paused over the list of line items, the audit trail notes, the flagged transactions, cross-referenced with original agreements. I stayed quiet. The silence felt clean. "I'm giving 2 weeks," I said after a moment. "But I imagine the timeline may shift depending on how this is handled." Her mouth opened like she meant to argue, but no words followed. I saw something flicker in her eyes, not fear, not quite, but the recognition of someone who's just realized a door has been opened. They can't close. "I won't be discussing the contents further," I added. "It's already been submitted through the appropriate compliance channel." I turned and left without waiting for her response. As the door clicked shut behind me, I felt a calm settle into my spine, something sharp but steady like momentum, finding direction. My final 2 weeks were unremarkable by design. I showed up each day at 8:00, logged in, answered what needed answering, delivered the reports I'd already half written. I kept everything clean, neutral, professional. No dramatic exits, no skipped meetings. I wasn't there to make noise. I was there to finish. But behind that calm was a machine running on pure intention. Every spare minute I archived. I pulled up 3 years' worth of budget models, performance dashboards, grant strategy trees, all of it built from scratch. All of it mine. None of it ever acknowledged beyond generic praise in all hands meetings. I labeled each file clearly tagged by region and fiscal year, annotated with context. I created a master index so there would be no confusion, no question of where credit belonged. This wasn't leverage, it was clarity. I didn't need to convince anyone, I just needed it to exist somewhere undeniable. At home, I encrypted the archive and saved it to a secure drive. I emailed one copy to my attorney just in case. The final version, printed and condensed, went into an unmarked envelope addressed to the Seattle Times Investigative Desk Attention, Education Equity Division. No return address, no message, just a single post-it note, public funds, private optics. I didn't touch a single file that wasn't mine. I didn't speak ill of anyone in the halls. But things began to shift around me. A program officer asked where to find the cost breakdown for a pilot I'd designed. I told her I'd sent it 6 months ago twice. She frowned, realizing the version she'd used must have been edited. People noticed I wasn't in the Slack channels anymore. LILA sent a chirpy all-staff memo reminding everyone to forward legacy data to central systems. Someone replied with a question about source validation, and the thread went quiet. On my last Friday, I left my desk exactly as I'd found it. No farewell lunch, no email blast. I signed the HR forms and dropped my badge in the tray. On the way out, I passed the break room where the leadership team was gathered over catered pastries and filtered smiles. I kept walking. I had somewhere more important to be. The cafe sat between a failing shoe repair shop and a florist that never opened on time. It was the kind of place no one noticed unless they were looking for something quiet. That's why I chose it. Imari Vance arrived right on time. She wore a gray wool coat, carried a slim notebook, and didn't introduce herself like a news anchor. Just a calm nod, a firm handshake, and eyes that didn't wander. She ordered black coffee, then opened her notebook but didn't press record. Not yet. "Tell me what you want me to know," she said simply. I didn't rehearse. I didn't editorialize. I started with the numbers, year-over-year grant shifts, internal allocations that didn't match public-facing budgets, donor statements that quietly disappeared after events. I handed over copies pulled from open databases, printed from email attachments, highlighted with careful notes. I didn't name every person involved. I didn't have to. The patterns spoke for themselves. Imari didn't interrupt. She took occasional notes, but mostly listened the way you only do when you've already seen the outline of a fire and are waiting for someone to hand you the match. "It's been building for a while," I said. "They stopped tracking impact 2 years ago. Now it's all optics press releases, keynote panels, partnerships with no substance. And the money is moving faster than the results." She nodded slowly. "Why now?" "Because they gambled that I'd stay quiet, and because no one else gets to carry the blame when this house of cards collapses." She didn't ask how I felt. She asked for timelines, audit trails, names of the programs most affected. I gave her what I had, just enough to verify, just enough to open a door wider. "I'm not looking for revenge," I said at the end. "I'm looking for accountability." Imari closed her notebook gently. "You've just given us enough to demand it." Outside, the sky had turned that soft gray Seattle does so well, quiet, still, full of weather that's never quite rain. I stepped out without saying goodbye. We both understood the rest didn't need words. The next step would speak loud enough. 3 weeks after I walked out of Emberlight for the last time, the article landed. It ran on a Tuesday morning just under the fold of the Seattle Times digital front page. The headline was quiet but deliberate. "The Cost of Applause. How one nonprofit traded impact for optics." There were no names, no direct accusations. But the data points, the programs, the inconsistencies, they were too specific to ignore. Anyone who worked there would recognize them instantly. Anyone who funded them would have questions. By noon, the first donor statement dropped a paused grant cycle pending internal review. The second followed by evening, citing concerns about strategic clarity. The third wasn't a statement at all, just a quietly removed logo from the partnership page. Inside the building I no longer entered, people were moving differently. A former colleague forwarded me a screenshot, an emergency all-staff meeting scheduled under the subject line, "Recentering Mission Amid Misinformation." The irony wasn't lost on me. LILA tried to lead a Zoom Q&A the next day. I didn't watch it, but the messages I got afterward painted a clear enough picture. She froze midway through a sentence, couldn't explain how one program's outcomes had vanished from the last quarterly brief. Someone asked about the impact algorithms she mentioned in a podcast interview. Apparently, she changed the subject. Celeste, for her part, went radio silent. The woman who once posted weekly reflections on leadership growth hadn't published anything in 10 days. Emberlight's LinkedIn shut off comments altogether. By the end of the week, one staffer posted anonymously on an internal forum asking if any actual impact metrics had been reviewed since March. No one responded. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. But there was a quiet hum beneath everything, like something beginning to unravel. Not out of spite, not from sabotage, but from the weight of a truth that had been ignored too long. At home, I refreshed the article once before closing the tab. It was out there now. That meant I could finally turn my full attention forward towards something I was finally free to build. I called it Quell Metrics because I didn't want my name to be the brand I wanted the work to speak. A small LLC, a modest website, a single-page services overview written in plain language. No hero banners, no visionary mission statements, just a clean portfolio and a quiet promise systems that work, not systems that impress. The first contract came in through a referral I hadn't expected. A district grant coordinator I'd trained years ago, now heading a literacy coalition in Yakima. She didn't ask for a pitch. She asked if I had time. I did. The second came from a nonprofit in rural Nevada, serving reservation schools with no consistent funding cycle. Their director told me they'd seen my frameworks passed around in PDF form, stripped of logos, but intact in logic. "We didn't know who wrote them," she said. "But we followed your numbers before we knew your name." The third was a surprise. A startup foundation with a clean mission and a ragged back end. They wanted help getting their reporting structure clean before accepting national attention. "We don't want to become another Emberlight," they said. I didn't ask how they knew. I worked from the guest room in my house, now converted into a clean, quiet office with matte walls and a view of the back garden. I didn't hang any certificates. I didn't need to. There was something deeply grounding about building without translation, no leadership politics to navigate, no performative check-ins. Just strategy, structure, results. I kept my hours steady. No more 11 p.m. reforecasts or Sunday grant rewrites. And yet somehow I did more. Every model I designed solved a real problem. Every call I took led to something that actually moved. I didn't have to shout to be heard. The people who needed to listen already were. I had no interest in scaling fast, no illusions of becoming a thought leader. I just wanted to build what worked. And in the quiet rhythm of honest work, I began to realize I hadn't lost anything at Emberlight. I'd only been waiting to be free of it. The headlines didn't surprise me anymore. One by one, they trickled out short, factual, clinical. A former project partner filed suit for breach of grant terms. 2 major funders issued statements distancing themselves from past oversight frameworks. The Emberlight board, under mounting pressure, accepted Celeste's resignation. The language was polite. The timing was not. LILA's exit came a few days later, buried in a press release about realigning internal energy and external expectations. The phrase, stress-related issues, appeared halfway through. No one shared the announcement internally. It simply happened, and her name disappeared from the staff directory by the end of the week. The email from Celeste came late on a Thursday night. Subject line, apology. Her address wasn't the work one. It came from a personal account, the kind with a generic Gmail domain and no signature banner. I almost deleted it unread, but curiosity got the better of me. It wasn't long. 5 paragraphs, measured but not defensive. She admitted to ignoring warning signs, to prioritizing presentational clarity over operational truth. She wrote that the foundation's collapse had begun long before the article, that my resignation had simply accelerated what they were too slow to confront. She ended with, "You were right to walk away. I was wrong to assume you wouldn't." I read it twice. Not because I needed the words, but because I wanted to be sure I hadn't misread the tone. It wasn't groveling. It wasn't strategic. It felt like someone trying to let go of their own noise. I replied a few hours later. No flourishes, no coldness. "Thank you for the clarity. I wish you steadiness in your next chapter." That was it. No anger, no vindication. Just a closed tab, and then back to the metrics dashboard I'd been reviewing for a new client. The work didn't stop. It didn't even pause. Somewhere out there, an old structure was collapsing in silence. But in my corner of the world, something else was unfolding. Something steady. Something built to last. It came on a Monday morning, nestled between a reminder to update my quarterly client summaries and a shipping confirmation for printer paper. The sender's name wasn't familiar, but the domain caught my eye, an education innovation fund I'd followed quietly for years. I opened the email with half my attention, expecting a newsletter or an invite to a webinar. Instead, it was a proposal. They'd reviewed a demo of the grant mapping dashboard I'd posted in a closed education forum 2 weeks earlier. The same tool I'd built in pieces during stolen weekend hours at Emberlight. The one that had been dismissed twice as too granular to scale. Their message was direct. They saw potential. Not just to fund it, but to help bring it to districts across the country. No branding tweaks. No promises of visibility in exchange for control. Just a full grant, a platform, and an offer to join their advisory board. "We don't want to package your idea," the email said. "We want to protect it while it grows." I stared at the screen for a long time, not out of hesitation, but because it felt like something I hadn't realized I was waiting for. Permission not just to contribute, but to lead, to shape something without apology. I scheduled a call that afternoon. It lasted 40 minutes. They asked about expansion, about data integrity, about adaptability for underfunded districts. They didn't ask about my resume. They already knew the story. It was why they'd reached out. By the end of the week, I signed the agreement. Quietly, without ceremony, a contract and a path forward not toward prestige, but toward usefulness, toward systems that didn't buckle under spotlight. Afterward, I walked outside and stood in the garden for a few minutes. The rosemary I planted in spring had started to bloom steady and unnoticed until now. I didn't need to be seen to know it was growing. Still, it felt good to finally have the space to cultivate something in full daylight. The frame isn't fancy, just a plain black border matte glass, no embossing. Inside it, a single line in small centered text, too data-driven to inspire. It came from my final annual evaluation at Emberlight, a throwaway phrase buried in a paragraph about growth potential. At the time, it stung sharper than the missed promotion, deeper than the silence that followed. Now it hangs above my monitor, not as a scar, as a milestone. I see it every morning when I open my laptop and begin mapping new strategy models or reviewing implementation data from pilot districts. I see it again during my mentorship calls, monthly sessions. I started with a handful of younger professionals who'd reached out after the article. People who build well but get passed over. People who get told they're too detailed, too intense, too focused on process. We talk about infrastructure. We talk about boundaries. But mostly we talk about value, the kind that doesn't trend, but holds things together when everyone else is chasing headlines. I always end the sessions with the same question. Whose system are you building and why not your own? Some of them nod right away. Some just blink, letting the question settle. But all of them understand what I mean. You can give your talent away forever to people who don't see it, or you can build with intention, even if it's quiet at first. The dashboard I once made in the margins of other people's plans is now active in 7 districts. The Innovation Fund calls it a cornerstone. I still just call it functional. What matters isn't how many people know I made it. What matters is that it works. Sometimes I still get emails from people in that old world. Not apologies, just breadcrumbs of realization. A forwarded policy I wrote. A tool someone said was missing. I don't reply. I don't need to. They were never my audience. I built this chapter for the ones who see what others miss. And the more I share, the more I realize my silence was never absence. It was focus. It was design. And now, it's movement.